Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss a way to build the core of a commander deck around Jon Irenicus Shattered One as its general. Thank you for choosing MTG Burgeoning for your Magic the Gathering content. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and consider becoming a subscriber. Doing so supports the channel and makes you eligible for our various subscriber rewards series. If you would like to support the channel further, then click the link to our Patreon page in the description below. There, you can join our ongoing Pack Wars series as a 1-month supporter or ongoing member. Or try joining Pack Wars for free by commenting on every MTG Burgeoning video in a month. We strive to offer creative rewards through our various Patreon tiers. So if Pack Wars isn't for you, then something else will be. Links to our content and various subscriber rewards series can be found in the description below. Send us an email, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. We are your channel for all things magic. Jon Irenicus Shattered One is a 3/3 elf wizard for 2 in Dimir colors. At the beginning of our end step, target opponent gains control of up to 1 target creature we control. We put 2 +1/+1 counters on it and tap it. It's goaded for the rest of the game, and it gains "This creature can't be sacrificed." Putting the creature tapped onto an opponent's side of the battlefield prevents that opponent from chump blocking with it through any politicking at the EDH table. Whenever a creature we own but don't control attacks, we draw a card. The goad mechanic continues to expand, and this time it does so through Dimir-colored lenses. We want to take advantage of Johnny's goad and card drawing abilities. The longer these creatures remain on the battlefield, the more opportunities they have to cause havoc to our opponents, and the more opportunities we have to draw card after card after card. The vision for building the core of an EDH deck around Johnny is very clear. With an eye towards evasive biggins, we will craft a deck featuring creatures that easily lead us to victory, as well as disrupt our opponent's game plans along the way. Let's begin by prioritizing effects that force our opponents to sacrifice their own creatures, so only Johnny's goaded creatures remain under their control. Doing so will make combat even more difficult for our opponents, as their creatures are tapped either due to Johnny's donate ability or are tapped because they were goaded into combat. Demonic Taskmaster is a 4/3 with flying that forces its controller to sacrifice a creature other than itself at the beginning of their upkeep. Remember, other creatures goaded by Johnny can't be sacrificed. Desecration Elemental is an unreal 8/8 with fear, and whenever a player casts a spell, its controller sacrifices a creature, but they can't sacrifice creatures goaded by Johnny. Lord of the Pit, an old school classic, is a 7/7 flyer with trample. At the beginning of its controller's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature other than Lord of the Pit. If they can't, Lord of the Pit deals 7 damage to them. As a reminder, Johnny goaded creatures can't be sacrificed. Next up is Lord of the Pit 2.0, Liege of the Pit, which has the same stats and abilities as its predecessor without the morph ability. Pain Racker Oni is a 5/4 with fear that forces its controller to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of their upkeep, if they don't control an ogre. Shadowborn Demon is a 5/6 with flying, lets us destroy a target non-demon creature when it ETBs, and at the beginning of its controller's upkeep, if there are less than 6 creature cards in that player's graveyard, they sacrifice a creature. Phyrexian Obliterator's mana value is a little tricky at 4 black mana, but its 5/5 body with trample is a treat. Whenever a source deals damage to it, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. Do you know what they won't be sacrificing? Johnny's goaded creatures. Now let's take this forced sacrifice theme and kick it up a notch by including creatures that force their controllers to sacrifice not just creatures, but permanents. And they certainly are not sacrificing any creatures goaded by Johnny. Phyrexian Negator is a 5/5 with trample, and whenever it is dealt damage, its controller sacrifices those many permanents. Greater Harvester has devastating sacrifice effects stapled onto its 5/6 body. Its controller sacrifices a permanent at the beginning of their upkeep, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices 2 permanents. Under the right set of circumstances, the only permanents our opponents control could be ours. Speaking of sacrifice effects, Plague Reaver in its massive 6/5 body forces its controller to sacrifice each other creature they control at the beginning of their unstep. But, of course, not if they were goaded by Johnny. Rust Elemental forces its controller to sacrifice an artifact at the beginning of their upkeep, and if they can't, it becomes tapped and its controller loses 4 life. In this instance, we lose out on the card draw trigger, but ensuring that the only artifact this opponent controls is causing them to lose 4 life each turn, that's just aces in our books. Let's keep this party going by including some other ways to disrupt our opponent's plans. Taniwa is a 7/7 with phasing and trample, and at the beginning of its controller's upkeep, all lands that player controls phase out. Good luck playing a game of Commander with access to your land base just 50% of the time. Rotting Regisaur is a mammoth 7/6 for 2 and 1 black mana, can be chump blocked for days, and forces its controller to discard a card at the beginning of their upkeep. Gut Wrencher Oni is a 5/4 with trample, and also forces its controller to discard a card at the beginning of their upkeep, as long as they don't control an ogre. Thought Eater reduces its controller's hand size by 3 cards, and its evasion provides it with some staying power on the battlefield. Thought Devourer takes it a step further by reducing its controller's hand size by 4, and its 4/4 body with flying should keep it on the battlefield for the long game. Steel Golem prevents its controller from casting any creature spells, and Grid Monitor does the same for a slightly higher mana value and with a slightly bigger body. In addition to sitting back and watching our opponents attack each other with our creatures, let's speed up the process by adding some creatures that will lower their life totals even more quickly. Ebon Drake is a 3/3 with flying, and whenever a player casts a spell, its controller loses 1 life. Whenever Flesh Reaver deals combat damage to a creature or an opponent, it deals that much damage to its controller. Aside from some of the most disturbing artwork in Magic's history, Grinning Demon is a 6/6 that makes its controller lose 2 life at the beginning of their upkeep. Whenever Ebonblade Reaper attacks, its controller loses half their life rounded up. If it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half of their life rounded up as well. With so many creatures being forced into combat, Sour of Discord makes for a much quicker endgame. After it enters the battlefield, this 6/6 demon with flying allows us to choose 2 players. Whenever damage is dealt to one of the chosen players, the other chosen player also loses that much life. For a slower and more drawn-out demise, Blighted Agent's Infect and Unblockability will set a clock from which our opponents will not be able to snooze. For a couple of riskier options, Abyssal Persecutor is a massive 6/6 with flying and trample that prevents its controller from winning the game and prevents its opponents from losing it, which is an option much better suited for 1v1 gameplay. Lastly, and talk about a risky play, but Phage the Untouchable is an instant game ender if it strikes an opponent for combat damage. If by some chance our opponents are able to get their own creatures onto their sides of the battlefield, then we will need to provide some additional evasion for the purposes of sending their life totals plummeting to 0. The underloved and underplayed Dauth the Embrace will do the trick. For 2 black mana, we give target creature Shadow until end of turn. A creature that has Shadow can only be blocked by creatures with Shadow, and a creature with Shadow can't block creatures without Shadow. Shadow, Shadow everywhere. For a one-time use, Shadow Rift will give target creature Shadow until the end of turn and draw us a card. Sly Instigator makes target creature an opponent controls unblockable until end of turn, with the added bonus of goading it if Johnny didn't goad it first. For a less fragile option but with a higher activation cost, Rogue's Passage makes target creature unblockable, a great way to enable some rage phage at the EDH table. Let's complete the core of this build by optimizing and enhancing our forced combat theme. Since we'll be drawing a lot of cards from Johnny's donated and goaded creatures, let's benefit from it further by including Psychosis Crawler. Each card we draw is another 1 life lost for each of our opponents. Sig, River Cutthroat, should draw us multiple cards during each round of turns. Although it doesn't have evasion, Chasm Skulker gets a +1/+1 counter added to it whenever we draw a card, with a nice Army on a Stick death trigger as well. 2 triggers are better than 1, so we'll look to activate Striatic Resonator early and often, doubling the number of donating gold creatures to our opponents or drawing twice the cards. Pushing the envelope even further, Lithoform Engine copies Johnny's triggers, but also copies instant and sorcery spells we control, as well as permanent spells. Staring across the table at an army of our own making could be intimidating. So, for the purposes of protecting ourselves against a potential 1v1 situation with our last opponent, Ether Eyes will bounce those attacking creatures right back to our hand, and Evacuation will do the same and without the need to send them into combat. Whelming Wave will clear the battlefield of nearly all non-water-based creatures, and lastly, if our side of the battlefield is light, then we could cast Reigns of Power as a one-shot combat trick and finish off that last opponent. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a commander deck around Jon Irenicus' Shattered One as its general. Removal spells, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for taking advantage of Johnny's Donate and Goad abilities, in addition to providing ways to optimize these themes. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.